The sky over Denver burned green. Colonel Marcus Webb stood on the rooftop of what used to be the federal building, watching the massive ships descend through the Colorado atmosphere. They moved like sharks through water, confident, hungry, unstoppable. His radio crackled with reports from every military installation across North America. The same message repeated, "They're here. They're massive. We have no idea how to hurt them." Marcus was 53 years old. He'd served 3 wars, seen nations crumble, watched soldiers die for reasons that seemed smaller every year. But nothing, had prepared him for the Zorthak. The first creature emerged from the lead ship. It was 50 feet tall, maybe more. A nightmare of evolution, scales that shimmered like oil on water, each one thick as a tank hull. Its legs moved with terrible grace, muscles rippling under armor that no bullet could penetrate. The head was pure predator, teeth like railroad spikes, eyes that glowed amber in the afternoon sun. When it screamed, the sound shattered windows across 5 city blocks. "Sir, we're receiving transmissions from command," his aide, a young captain named David Chin, said through the headset. His voice shook. "They want us to coordinate the artillery strike. They say we can bring it down if we hit it with enough sustained fire." Marcus watched through binoculars as the creature moved toward a downtown office building. Its tail, muscular, powerful, swayed behind it like a cable. When it swung that tail at the building, the entire structure collapsed like a child's toy. "Tell command we're standing by," Marcus said quietly. He'd learned something in 3 decades of military service. You don't give orders until you understand the battlefield. Right now, the Zorthak was the only thing he needed to understand. 12 hours later, the artillery strike happened. They fired everything they had: tank shells, cruise missiles, Apache helicopters carrying anti-armor rounds. The base at Peterson Space Force Base went dark from the electromagnetic pulse of the coordinated strike. For 20 seconds, the sky lit up like a man-made aurora. When the smoke cleared, the Zorthak was walking toward the next target. It had 30 new scorch marks on its scales. Nothing else. The radio exploded with panic. Command was screaming at him to order a strategic nuclear strike. The president was on a conference call. Intelligence reports were flooding in from every allied nation reporting similar results. Their weapons, their technology, their most advanced military hardware, all useless. Marcus lowered his binoculars and turned to Chen. "Get me every engineer, every demolition expert, and every person who knows how to make explosives. I don't care if they're still in prison. I don't care if we have to drag them out of retirement. And Chen, get me maps. Old maps. I need to know every building, every subway tunnel, every weak point in Denver's infrastructure." Chen's eyes widened. "Sir, we're supposed to—" "I know what we're supposed to do," Marcus interrupted. "We're supposed to lose. But we're not going to. Not today. Not against these things." He turned back to the window. Outside, the Zorthak had stopped in the middle of downtown Denver. It was watching the city. Watching them. Its massive head tilted slightly, a movement that, in any predator, meant one thing. It was hunting. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear exactly. Something colder. Something older. It was the feeling a man gets when he realizes he's about to fight a war that nobody has ever won, using weapons that nobody has ever used. "Welcome to Earth," he whispered to the creature. Then he picked up his radio and started planning the most desperate, most audacious, most impossible battle of his life. 3 days after the first strike failed, the Zorthak had killed 14,000 people. Not through organized battle. Through simple hunting. They moved through cities with the casualty mindset of a cat batting at mice. They didn't need to conquer territory or establish supply lines. They just needed to feed, and humans, soft, slow, fragile humans, were abundant prey. The military had pulled back to establish defensive perimeters. The government had issued evacuation orders. Millions of people were flooding toward the Rocky Mountains, toward remote areas, toward anywhere that seemed far from those glowing amber eyes. But in a secure bunker beneath what used to be NORAD, Marcus was running a different kind of war. "Show me the impact readings again," he said to Dr. Sarah Liu, a structural engineer who'd been teaching at the University of Colorado until 48 hours ago. Sarah pulled up the holographic display. Impact data from the artillery strikes, the missiles, the helicopter rounds. Thousands of data points, all showing the same thing: kinetic weapons simply didn't work. "Here's what we're dealing with," Sarah said, highlighting a scale-by-scale analysis. "The Zorthak scales aren't solid armor like we thought. They're actually layered bone cartilage composites. Each scale overlaps the next, and underneath," she zoomed in, "there's a network of hollow channels. The military thinks that's a weakness. They think if they hit hard enough, they'll crack the structure. But they're wrong, Marcus finished. Completely wrong, Sarah confirmed. The scales are designed to absorb impact. The hollow channels disperse kinetic energy across the creature's body. The more you hit it with bullets and shells, the more efficient it becomes at spreading the force. It's like throwing rocks at water. Marcus stood up and walked to the large window that looked out over the tactical map of Denver. Red dots indicated Zorthak positions. Green dots showed human defensive lines. The ratio was terrifying. The Zorthak came to this world expecting advanced civilization, he said slowly. They were prepared to encounter resistance from technology comparable to theirs. Ships, plasma weapons, shields, energy weapons. That's what their armor evolved to resist. Right? Sarah said. So kinetic impact doesn't. But they've never encountered a species willing to use chemistry, Marcus interrupted. They've never faced someone willing to blow up buildings. Never imagined a predator that would burn forests to flush them out. Never evolved defenses against, he paused, human desperation. He turned to face Sarah. The Zorthak are perfect predators in a technological war. But they're not fighting a technological war. They're fighting us. For the first time in 3 days, Sarah smiled. Within hours, Marcus had assembled his team. Beyond Sarah, there was Jackson Webb, no relation. A former explosives expert who'd spent 10 years in federal prison for an accident that killed 3 construction workers. There was Yuki Tanaka, an environmental scientist who'd spent her career studying ecosystems and collapse patterns. And there was Robert "Red" Patterson, a Vietnam War veteran and tunneling expert who'd built underground bunkers for 30 years. They had maps spread across the tactical table. Subway systems, water mains, electrical grids, building structural blueprints, natural gas lines. They had the creature's movement patterns. They had data on how fast it moved, how much it ate, what kinds of terrain slowed it down. What they didn't have was time. Here, Jackson said, pointing at a section of downtown where 3 Zorthak were currently moving. This is our shot. The creatures are moving through an area with heavy infrastructure. Weak ground. Old buildings. If we collapse that entire section, we lose an entire city block, Yuki interrupted. But more importantly, we need to understand something. These creatures are hunters. They're following a predatory pattern. They don't move randomly. They're herding. Everyone looked at her. Herding? Marcus asked. Look at their movement vectors, Yuki said, pulling up a simulation. They're not attacking everywhere at once. They're focusing on certain zones, concentrating prey into smaller and smaller areas. They're learning our behavior patterns. They're adapting. Marcus felt ice in his veins. This wasn't just an invasion. This was a hunt, conducted by creatures that had perfected the art over millions of years. Then we changed the rules, Marcus said. We stop thinking like prey. We start thinking like something else. Something that turns the tables. Red looked at him. What do you mean? I mean, Marcus said carefully, that these creatures came to this world expecting to dominate. They expected advanced technology, orbital defenses, energy weapons. They prepared for that war. But what if we don't give them that war? What if we give them something they've never encountered? He stood and walked to the window again, looking at the red dots on his tactical map. What if we give them chaos? They called it Operation Honeycomb, and it was insane. The basic plan was this. Instead of defending open ground, humanity would use Earth's greatest advantage, its architecture, its infrastructure, its cities, as a weapon. They would create a maze so complex, so dangerous, so full of collapsing structures and hidden passages that the Zorthak's size would become its greatest vulnerability. The first test happened in a section of downtown Denver called Lodo, where old brick buildings dated back to the 1880s. Marcus stood in the command center, watching through dozens of security cameras as a single Zorthak wandered into the zone. The creature was 15 meters wide at the shoulder. The buildings were designed for humans. Trigger sequence 1, Marcus ordered. Jackson had spent 18 hours rigging the buildings. Structural supports had been severed. Load-bearing walls had been marked for collapse. It looked delicate, engineering at the edge of chaos, but it was precise down to the millimeter. The first building, an old bank, was designed with load-bearing columns arranged in a specific pattern. As the Zorthak moved through the street, its weight shifted from one foot to the next. That weight, concentrated at specific points, was enough to trigger the carefully engineered collapse. The building came down on the creature. Not crushing it, the Zorthak was far too strong to be killed by collapsing brick and mortar. But it knocked the creature down, disoriented it, trapped one of its massive legs under tons of debris. Secondary charges, Marcus ordered. The second building, directly across the street, had been fitted with explosives in its structural core. When it detonated, the blast came from underneath, and the building pancaked downward. The Zorthak rolled to the side, but it was now in the street, struggling to stand, surrounded by rubble that limited its movement. Then the third building fell. And the fourth. By the time the creature managed to stand, and it took 7 minutes, a time window that previously would have been unimaginable, it was surrounded by a chaos of rubble and twisted metal. Every direction presented obstacles. Every path required careful navigation. The Zorthak screamed. It was a sound of pure rage echoing across Denver. But it moved forward cautiously now, testing each step, aware that the ground beneath its feet could betray it. That was the moment a hidden team of soldiers emerged from the rubble, armed with improvised incendiary devices. They tossed them onto the creature's scales, not trying to kill it. They knew that was impossible, but trying to drive it in a specific direction. Toward the next section of the maze. It's working, Chin said breathlessly, watching the creature's movement vector change. First phase is working, Marcus corrected. The second phase is where we actually test if this is genius or suicide. The second phase involved luring the Zorthak toward the downtown metro tunnel system. Denver's metro was built in the 1990s, with tunnels carved straight through solid bedrock. The tunnels were about 20 meters wide and 12 meters high. Plenty of space for a human, but for a 50-foot creature, it was a completely different story. Yuki's team had spent days analyzing the structural integrity of the rock. They'd identified stress points, weak zones, sections where the stone was fractured and unstable. They'd planted charges with mathematical precision. Enough to create collapses, but only in specific locations. The Zorthak entered the first tunnel. It was, by all accounts, an unsettling moment for the creature. Its senses were designed to work in open spaces. The echo of its own breathing bounced off stone walls. The passage was tight. The creature had to lower its head, compress its shoulders. It moved forward anyway. Collapse sequence alpha, Marcus commanded. The rock came down in front of the creature. A massive section of ceiling collapsed, blocking the tunnel with rubble. The Zorthak stopped, let out a sound somewhere between a roar and a hiss, and turned to go back. But the tunnel behind it was also collapsing. Yuki had timed the charges so the forward collapse would trigger first, followed by the rear collapse 3 minutes later. It was a trap, but not a killing one. The creature had space to move, space to survive. What it didn't have was choices. It's panicking, Sarah observed, watching biometric data stream in from sensors placed in the tunnel. The Zorthak was moving more aggressively now, less carefully. Its tail whipped against the tunnel walls, cracking stone. Its claws raked across rock, digging. It was looking for a way out, any way out. And that was when it found the side passage. Yuki's team had carved it deliberately. A narrow tunnel only 10 meters wide and 8 meters high, that led deeper into the earth. It was a passage the Zorthak could squeeze through if it compressed its body. It's taking the bait, Red said, a hint of awe in his voice. The creature began moving toward the side passage. Collapse sequence beta, Marcus ordered. The main tunnel behind the creature collapsed completely, sealing its retreat. The creature let out a scream that vibrated through the rock, but it was committed now. It had only one direction to go. Into the passage. Into the deep. For 14 minutes, the creature was underground, moving through a tunnel that kept narrowing, kept collapsing behind it, kept offering only one direction. Forward, deeper, into the earth. Then it emerged. But it didn't emerge in Denver. It emerged 2 miles outside the city, in an open quarry that Yuki's team had prepared as a secondary staging ground. The creature pulled itself out of the ground, scaled with dust, disoriented and furious. But alive. Stand down, Marcus ordered. The teams that had been positioned to ambush the creature held their fire. Their weapons, incendiary charges, improvised explosives, crude traps, would do nothing to kill it. What they needed to do was study it. Learn from it. The creature survived, Chin said. The creature always survives, Marcus agreed. That's not what we're testing. What are we testing? Chin asked. Marcus watched the Zorthak shake itself, scattering dust and debris. The creature was confused, clearly disoriented by what had just happened to it. For the first time since arriving on Earth, it had been forced to move in a way its biology didn't prefer. It had been controlled, herded, manipulated. We're testing whether a superior predator can be outthought, Marcus said quietly. Whether intelligence can defeat instinct. He paused, watching the creature on the monitors. And if one human could stop one of them. He continued, then maybe, just maybe, we could stop all of them. Word of Operation Honeycomb spread. Not through official military channels. Those were still demanding conventional counterattacks that failed consistently. Word spread through soldiers who survived the tests, through engineers who understood what Marcus was attempting, through a growing undercurrent of hope that maybe, just maybe, humans didn't have to die en masse. Within a week, Marcus had expanded his bunker team. Engineers from across the country, demolition experts, military strategists, soldiers who'd been pulled from failed conventional defense lines. Even some of the Zorthak bodies that had been killed in the early chaos. Not killed by weapons but accidentally crushed when a building collapsed during the chaos of the first invasion, those were being studied by teams of biologists trying to understand the creatures. Dr. Amanda Mitchell was one of those biologists. She was in her 60s, with gray hair she'd stopped coloring during the invasion and eyes that had studied the mechanics of evolution for 40 years. She came to Marcus with conclusions that changed everything. The Zorthak didn't come here alone, she said, pulling up holographic images of the creature's anatomy. And they didn't come here unprepared. Look at this, she highlighted the neurological patterns of the creature. This is evidence of communication technology, probably neural. They're connected to each other. They're coordinating. We knew that, Marcus said. No, you don't understand, Amanda interrupted. They're not just coordinating in the sense of working together. They're sharing tactical information. When one creature encounters an obstacle, it communicates to the others what happened. They're learning from each other's failures. The room went quiet. So if we use the same tactic twice, Jackson started. The second creature will be prepared for it, Amanda finished. Or at least, the creatures will have a strategic response. Marcus felt something click in his mind. This was the real problem. Not individual Zorthak. Not even the species as a whole. The problem was adaptation. The problem was that every tactic they developed would eventually be countered. We need to think differently, Marcus said. Not just about how to fight them physically but about how to fight them strategically. They share information. They learn from failure. So we need to make sure they're always failing in ways they haven't encountered before. That's impossible, Sarah said. Eventually we'll run out of tactics. No, Marcus replied. We won't. Because humans have something the Zorthak don't have. What? Chen asked. Desperation, Marcus said. They're invaders. They came here expecting to dominate. To hunt. They didn't come here expecting to be harassed by creatures that are willing to burn their own planet to kill invaders. They didn't come here expecting psychological warfare. They came here expecting physics. He pulled up the map of Denver. What if instead of building specific traps we build uncertainty? What if we create situations where the Zorthak don't know what's safe and what isn't? What if we make them question every step they take? Red leaned forward. You're talking about psychological torture. I'm talking about survival, Marcus said flatly. They hunt using confidence and instinct. If we can break their confidence, we break their hunting pattern. And if we break their hunting pattern, we buy time for the rest of humanity to either escape or prepare countermeasures. Over the next 2 weeks, Operation Honeycomb evolved. It became less about killing the Zorthak and more about harassing them. Less about specific tactics and more about randomized, unpredictable threats. Soldiers would set traps that didn't work. They'd plant explosives that were meant to fail. They'd create false heat signatures to draw creatures into areas that seemed threatening but were actually safe. The unpredictability became the weapon. What had been predictable architecture became a maze of uncertainty. What had been a straightforward hunt became a campaign of constant low-level stress. The Zorthak were losing their confidence. Marcus could see it in their movement patterns. They were moving more slowly. They were scanning their environment more carefully. They were communicating more frequently with each other, asking questions through their neural network that seemed to be variations of, what if we're not safe here? But there was a price. As human soldiers became more skilled at psychological harassment, the Zorthak became more aggressive. They started deliberately destroying buildings to deny humans hiding places. They started hunting at different times of day, breaking expected patterns. They started moving in organized groups instead of solitary hunts. They were adapting. And then, on day 19 of Operation Honeycomb, something unexpected happened. A Zorthak walked straight into a human settlement outside Denver, a refugee camp housing about 3,000 people, and it didn't attack. It simply walked through the center of the camp, moving slowly, deliberately, studying the humans. The terrified civilians pressed themselves against tents and walls, expecting slaughter. But the creature only looked, scanned, observed. Then it left. What was that? Chen asked, staring at the security footage. Communication, Amanda said quietly. She was watching the neurological readings from the creature, captured by remote sensors they'd hidden in the area. That creature was collecting information, studying human behavior. It was gathering intelligence. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding. They're not just reacting to us anymore, he said slowly. They're studying us, trying to understand us the same way we're trying to understand them. Which means? Sarah asked. Which means, Marcus said, the war just changed. They've stopped being simple predators. They're becoming strategists. He stood and walked to the window. Which means, he continued, we just became dangerous enough to be worth thinking about. The message came through encrypted channels 48 hours later. Colonel Harrison Webb, no relation to Marcus, though the coincidence bothered him, was commanding forces in what used to be California. His team had developed their own variation of the honeycomb strategy, using the Sierra Nevada mountains as natural barriers and the Mojave Desert as open ground where Zorthak-sized disadvantages could be exploited. His message was brief and stunning: we've killed 3 of them. Not eliminated. Not destroyed. Killed. The tactical room went silent when Marcus read those words aloud. How? Red asked. The explanation came through a detailed video transmission. 3 Zorthak had been herded into a narrow canyon system in the Sierra Nevadas. The canyon was less than 20 meters wide at most points, barely enough space for the creatures to move. Harrison's team had positioned teams at the high points, and when the creatures tried to escape, they'd triggered a series of avalanches. The rock had come down in controlled, massive slides. Not enough to immediately kill the Zorthak, but enough to trap them, to break bones, to create injuries that, combined with exposure and starvation, eventually led to death. This is different, Amanda said, studying the body analysis from Harrison's team. This isn't just tactical success. This is proof that the Zorthak can die. That they're not invulnerable. The impact on human morale was immediate and profound. Within a week, 3 more Zorthak had been killed using similar environmental tactics. A team in Australia had driven one into a salt lake where the density difference made movement nearly impossible. A team in Africa had used controlled fire to herd creatures into swamps where their weight caused them to sink. A team in South America had created a systematic collapse of an entire underground cave system. Humanity had stopped being prey. But with that shift came new problems. The Zorthak stopped hunting randomly. They consolidated into groups, moving with tactical precision. They began avoiding the environments humans had identified as dangerous. They started using their intelligence in ways that suggested they'd moved past survival instinct into deliberate strategy. And they started communicating with their homeworld. We're detecting increased electromagnetic activity from the larger ships, the communications officer reported. Heavy burst transmissions. It looks like fleet-wide updates. They're calling for reinforcements, Marcus said. Or they're reporting a threat, Amanda countered. Think about it. These creatures came to this world expecting a simple conquest. Instead, they've encountered something entirely new. A species willing to sacrifice infrastructure to trigger environmental catastrophes, to engage in asymmetric warfare using the planet itself as a weapon. From their perspective, we're not just soldiers. We're a civilization-level threat. Marcus nodded slowly. Which means they're going to escalate. The escalation came faster than expected. The Zorthak stopped trying to hunt humans in concentrated areas. Instead, they began attacking human infrastructure systematically. Power plants, water treatment facilities, communication networks, food storage centers. They were trying to collapse human civilization from the inside out, to force populations to disperse, to remove the ability for coordinated military response. It was brilliant, terrifying strategy. But it was also a mistake. They're thinking like conquerors, Sarah observed, watching the pattern of attacks. They're trying to dominate through infrastructure destruction. But that assumes humans depend on the same resource systems they do. We're not conquerors, Jackson added, understanding dawning on his face. We're survivors. We can live without electricity. We can find water without treatment centers. We can hunt and gather if we have to. Marcus felt something dangerous settle in his chest. Oh. They came here expecting to encounter a civilization similar to theirs, he said. Dependent on technology. Vulnerable to infrastructure collapse. Susceptible to conventional military force. But they didn't encounter that civilization. He pulled up maps showing the spread of human resistance across the entire planet. They encountered something that has survived extinction events. That has thrived without technology for hundreds of thousands of years. That has the capacity to adapt faster than any other species on this planet. And they made the mistake of assuming that adapting means dying. They didn't realize that humans don't choose between fighting and dying. He looked at his team. Humans choose to evolve. Over the next 3 weeks, humanity stopped thinking defensively. Teams across the globe started moving into the exact territories the Zorthak had claimed. They moved into ruins, into forests, into underground caverns. They stopped running from the creatures and started pursuing them. Not trying to kill them necessarily, though that happened sometimes almost accidentally when the creatures trapped themselves, but pursuing them with a tenacity that seemed impossible to the invaders. The psychological shift was profound. Before, soldiers had been afraid. They'd been defending territory, protecting civilians, trying to minimize losses. Now soldiers were hunting. They were understanding the Zorthak, predicting its movements, learning its patterns. And the Zorthak was learning something new: fear. Marcus saw it in Amanda's neurological data. The creature's stress hormones were elevated. Their communication patterns were showing signs of what could only be described as anxiety. They were making mistakes. Simple, tactical errors that a predator with confidence would never make. On day 38 of the expanded campaign, something remarkable happened. A Zorthak deliberately walked into a human settlement and surrendered. Not attacked. Not pretended to be non-threatening. Actually, genuinely surrendered. It lowered itself to the ground, folded its limbs, made itself as non-threatening as a 50-foot reptilian predator could possibly be. And it waited for humans to approach. "It's not a trap," Amanda said, studying the creature's neurological data. "This is genuine distress. This is an animal that's broken. Psychologically." The creature communicated its desire to be captured. Demanded to be caged. Made requests through whatever translation technology the Zorthak used to understand human languages. It wanted to stop. Within 48 hours, 7 more creatures surrendered. They didn't attack the humans who approached them. They allowed themselves to be herded toward containment areas. Some of them seemed almost relieved to be captured. "What's happening?" Chin asked, watching the data with confusion and wonder. "Learned helplessness," Amanda said quietly. "Repeated, unpredictable threats. Constant stress. Inability to establish dominance through traditional means. We've broken them. Not physically. Psychologically." Marcus understood then what they'd actually accomplished. The Zorthak were apex predators. They'd evolved in environments where they were the dominant force. They'd never learned to cope with sustained pressure from an enemy they couldn't dominate. They'd never learned resilience because they'd never needed it. But humans had learned it across millennia of struggling against larger animals, against famine, against each other. Humans had learned how to survive things that should have killed them. And in teaching the Zorthak what it felt like to be hunted, in forcing them into territory where their biology and instinct were disadvantages, in creating sustained psychological pressure that never let them adjust, humanity had broken an unbreakable enemy. Of the 32 Zorthak that had arrived on Earth, 27 had been killed or captured. The remaining 5 were consolidating near the Arctic Circle, in a region where human settlements were sparse and the environment was harsh even for Earth standards. The creatures had begun construction of defensive positions using salvage technology from their damaged ships. Marcus knew this was the final act. His team had tracked every movement, analyzed every communication burst. The Zorthak were preparing for a last stand. They were no longer trying to conquer or hunt. They were trying to survive. "We can end this," Red said, standing over the tactical map. "We send a team north. We drive them into the frozen ocean. We finish it." "We could," Marcus agreed. "But we shouldn't." Everyone looked at him. "These are intelligent creatures," Sarah said. "Not just instinctively intelligent. They've shown evidence of emotional complexity, of psychological vulnerability. Killing them might be necessary for our survival, but it's not necessary for this victory." "They invaded our world," Jackson said. "They killed thousands of people. Families. Children. And we've trapped them," Marcus replied. "We've psychologically broken them. We've proven that they're not apex predators here. We've redefined the power dynamic. What more do we need?" "We need them gone," Red said flatly. Marcus understood. Red had lost his family in the early days of the invasion. Many soldiers in his command had lost people. The rage was justified and deep. "We'll drive them to the Arctic," Marcus decided. "We'll establish a perimeter. We'll monitor them. We'll show the galaxy what humanity is capable of, not total annihilation, but absolute dominance achieved through intelligence instead of firepower." The move north took 3 weeks. It was a careful, controlled operation. Soldiers pushed the remaining Zorthak northward, away from the last centers of human population, toward the frozen landscape of the Arctic. The creatures didn't fight anymore. They simply moved as if bound by invisible chains, as if they'd accepted their new status in the hierarchy. By the time they reached their final position, a position of Marcus's choosing in a valley surrounded by natural barriers, the remaining Zorthak had been reduced to 3. One had died from injuries sustained in the psychological campaigns. One had been killed when it accidentally triggered a structure collapse while trying to shelter from a human observation team. The final 3 sat in a valley, surrounded by human soldiers at a distance. Not attacking. Not trying to escape. Simply existing, waiting for whatever came next. And then the message came from the largest Zorthak, the one that had first emerged from the invasion ship, the one that had seemed most dominant. Amanda translated it personally. "It wants to speak with you," she told Marcus. "With the human commander. It's requesting a direct meeting." The tactical room exploded with protests. It could be a trap. No weapons, absolutely. This could be a strategic deception. "Stand down," Marcus ordered. "I'll speak to it." Chin moved to stop him. "Sir, you can't." "I can and I will," Marcus said. "This creature watched its entire species die on our world. It watched us break its psychology. It watched us reshape the rules of existence. If there's going to be any kind of understanding between our species, it needs to start here." He walked out of the bunker alone. The Arctic wind was brutal, cutting through his heavy gear as he moved toward the valley. Behind him, snipers tracked his movement. Around him, soldiers positioned themselves to provide covering fire if needed. The largest Zorthak watched him approach. Its amber eyes followed him carefully. Its scales, once shimmering with health and vitality, were dull now. Its breathing was labored. The creature was dying, slowly from accumulated injuries and psychological trauma, but still alive. Still present. Marcus stopped 20 meters away. The creature slowly lifted its head. What happened next was transmission of information that no human had ever experienced before. Direct neural communication from a Zorthak consciousness. The experience was overwhelming. Marcus felt information flooding into his mind. The creature's name, a series of vibrations and colors that his human brain interpreted as something like Scarthak. Its history, its understanding of what had transpired on Earth, its recognition of what it had become. And underneath all of that, something that took Marcus's breath away: respect. The creature respected him. Not in the way a powerful being respects a weaker one. In the way one survivor respects another. One being that has endured impossible pressure and remained standing respects another being who has done the same. Scarthak communicated a simple request: asylum. The Zorthak wanted to stay on Earth. Not to continue hunting. Not to rebuild their invasion. To exist separately from humanity, in the territories they'd been driven into, living as whatever remained of their culture could become. Marcus stood in the Arctic wind, feeling the weight of the decision. He thought about the thousands who'd died. About the cities that had been destroyed. About the trauma that had scarred an entire species. But he also thought about what they'd accomplished. Not through technology, not through weapons, but through intelligence and ruthlessness and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. "Ask Scarthak," Marcus said aloud, knowing Amanda could hear through his communication system, "what his species would do in our position." Amanda translated. There was a pause. A long communication burst between the 3 remaining Zorthak. Then a response: "He says his species would not hesitate to destroy you completely," Amanda said quietly. "He says in the galaxy mercy is understood as weakness. He's asking why you would offer it." Marcus smiled. "Because we're not a galactic civilization," he said. "We're Earth. We survive. We adapt. We learn. And sometimes, learning means understanding that victory isn't about total annihilation. It's about reshaping the world according to our values." He took a step towards Scarthak. "Tell him we're offering asylum. Tell him our people will monitor them. Tell him if they violate the terms, we won't hesitate to finish what we started. But tell him also this: you invaded a world you didn't understand. You expected to encounter a civilization similar to yours. Instead, you encountered something older, something tougher, something that learned to survive in ways you can't imagine. And that thing taught you a lesson." He paused, making sure he had the words right. "Tell him that on Earth, the apex predator isn't the one with the biggest teeth. It's the one that refuses to break." The message went out to the galaxy in a way nobody expected. Not from human military channels. Not from government transmissions. From Scarthak itself, communicating across interstellar distances to the Zorthak homeworld and to the broader galactic community that was listening. The message was essentially an account of the invasion and the humiliating failure of an apex predator species to conquer a single planet inhabited by a species they'd considered primitive. The galactic response was complicated. Some civilizations saw it as a threat, a warning that Earth was more dangerous than they believed. Military theorists across 36 star systems began studying human tactics, trying to understand how a species without advanced space technology had managed to break an unbreakable predator. Other civilizations saw it as opportunity. Within 6 months, Earth had received contact from 17 different extraterrestrial species, all of them wanting to study human military strategy. Some wanted it for defensive purposes. Some wanted it for colonial ambitions of their own, and all of them wanted to know the same thing: how did humans do it? Marcus became, somewhat against his will, a strategic consultant to the galactic community. He sat in conference rooms with beings he'd never imagined, crystalline entities that communicated through resonant frequencies, sentient clouds of neural matter that could split into thousands of individual consciousnesses, energy beings that had to be contained in specialized fields to avoid dissolving into the background radiation. And to all of them he gave the same answer: we survived. Not because we were strong. Because we refused to stop trying. One particular meeting changed everything. A delegation from the United Council of Sentient Species asked Marcus a direct question. Your species uses a term, apex predator, to define dominance through physical superiority. But your victory over the Zorthak suggests a new definition. Can you explain what that definition is? Marcus thought carefully. The answer had been forming in his mind since the day he'd stood in the Arctic and spoken to Skarthek. An apex predator, he said slowly, is traditionally defined as the strongest, fastest, most armored, most dangerous. On most worlds that definition holds. But Earth has always been unique. Earth's apex predators weren't always the largest. They were the ones that understood cooperation. They were the ones that learned. They were the ones that could live anywhere, survive anything, and adapt faster than any other species around them. He pulled up data on human history. Look at our evolution. We're not the fastest runners. We're not the strongest swimmers. We're not the best climbers. But we survived ice ages. We survived predators that were 10 times our size. We survived disease, famine, each other. We survived because we could think our way around problems. Because we could communicate. Because we could pass knowledge from generation to generation faster than genetic adaptation. He stood, addressing the entire council. The Zorthak were apex predators on their world because their biology was superior. But on Earth they learned something new, that apex doesn't mean strongest. It means most adaptable. It means most willing to change. It means most capable of using intelligence as a weapon. The Council transmitted the information across the galaxy. It became known as the Earth Doctrine, a military philosophy that emphasized adaptability, environmental manipulation, psychological pressure, and the fundamental understanding that intelligence, the ability to learn and change faster than your enemy, was the ultimate advantage. Military academies across the galaxy began teaching human tactics. But something else happened too. Civilizations that had been considered too primitive to join the galactic community, species that had developed technology but hadn't reached spacefaring civilization yet, suddenly looked a lot more interesting. Suddenly, having advanced weapons technology wasn't as important as having a population that could think tactically, that could survive pressure, that could adapt. The galactic power structure started to shift. And at the center of all that change was Earth. But Marcus wasn't celebrating. He stood in his office looking at the population statistics. The invasion had killed 142,000 people. Infrastructure damage was estimated at trillions of dollars. Entire regions had been made uninhabitable by the ecological destruction of the conflict. 3 major cities had been reduced to rubble. They'd won a war they couldn't afford to win. Sarah found him staring at the data. "You're thinking too much," she said, sitting down across from him. "You did what needed to be done. You saved the species." "I destroyed a species' confidence and then offered them asylum on my world," Marcus said quietly. "I turned them into refugees. I forced them to live in wastelands where we monitor them constantly, where they're dependent on us for survival, where they'll slowly die out as their population declines." "You gave them a choice," Sarah countered. "That's more than they gave us." "Mercy," Marcus said, "is only noble if it costs something. Keeping the Zorthak alive costs us resources, costs us attention, costs us the ability to fully move on. I didn't give them asylum out of principle. I gave them asylum because it was strategically advantageous to offer mercy. That's not nobility. That's calculation." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Do you know what makes you different from the Zorthak? She finally asked. They came here expecting to dominate through strength. You came to save people. That's not calculation. That's what apex predators actually do. They survive and they do what's necessary, and sometimes they're smart enough to know when total victory means total loss. Marcus didn't respond. But he also didn't disagree. 5 years after the last Zorthak surrendered, the world had changed in ways nobody expected. The invasion hadn't destroyed humanity, but it had transformed it. Communities that had been scattered across the planet had learned to communicate in new ways. Urban societies had learned to survive without their infrastructure. Soldiers had learned that conventional warfare wasn't always about the best weapons, it was about the best strategy. But there were costs. Psychological issues swept through the surviving population. Trauma counseling centers in every major city were overbooked for years. Some people who'd lived through the invasion never fully recovered from the experience. Children who'd been born during the conflict grew up with inherited fear, a learned anxiety about the sky. And the Zorthak population was declining. Amanda monitored the medical data from the Arctic settlements where they were contained. The creatures were surviving technically. They were fed, they were sheltered, they were protected from the worst of Earth's harsh environment. But they were dying in the way that broken beings die, slowly from a loss of will to continue. We're killing them slowly, Amanda told Marcus during one of their regular briefings. They're killing themselves, Marcus replied. We gave them a choice. They chose this. Did they? Amanda challenged. Or did we break them so completely that they couldn't imagine a world where they did anything except what we allowed? Marcus didn't have an answer. But the question haunted him. It led him to make a decision that shocked everyone around him. He went to the Zorthak population with an offer: freedom. Not liberation. They weren't released to roam Earth and potentially threaten human populations. But freedom of choice. They were offered the opportunity to attempt to rebuild their ship. To leave Earth if they chose to. To return to the galactic community, to face whatever judgment their own people might offer, or to attempt a new life among the star systems. The response was overwhelming. Of the remaining 3,000 Zorthak on Earth, the original population had dwindled from casualties and the few deaths that had occurred despite human care. More than 80% chose to leave. They worked frantically, salvaging what remained of their crashed ships. They rebuilt communication systems. They established contact with other Zorthak fleets that were willing to provide transport. And slowly, painfully they left Earth. Scarthek was one of the last to leave. The ancient predator came to see Marcus one final time before his departure. The creature was dying. Amanda's medical analysis showed weeks, maybe days, but it walked with dignity, moving toward the human commander with a strange kind of respect. He says, Amanda translated, that you've taught him something new. That he's carrying a message to his people. A message about what strength actually means. Marcus knelt down, bringing himself closer to the creature's eye level. What message? He asked. The communication that came back was complex, multifaceted, but Amanda distilled it to its essence. Tell them that the apex predator on Earth is not the one with the biggest teeth. It's the one that refused to break when everything in the universe told it to break. Then Scarthek turned and walked toward the landing pad where a salvaged Zorthak ship awaited. The creature moved slowly, painfully, but with purpose. When the ship left Earth's atmosphere, Marcus felt something close to grief. In his bunker, in the quiet before dawn, he told Chin, I'm not sure if what we did was victory or tragedy. Maybe both. Maybe they're the same thing. 10 years after the last Zorthak ship left Earth, Marcus Webb was 83 years old and still working. The world had rebuilt. New cities rose where old ones had crumbled. The power grids had been restored. Agriculture had recovered. The psychological wounds were healing, though some scars would probably be permanent. Earth had been offered a seat at the Galactic Council. The representative position came with diplomatic immunity, access to galactic technology, and a voice in decisions that affected dozens of star systems. It was power and responsibility in equal measure. Marcus turned it down. Instead, he took a different position, as a teacher. He traveled from university to university, from military academy to military academy, teaching people the lessons the Zorthak invasion had taught humanity. He talked about adaptability, about the difference between strength and power, about how intelligence could overcome physical advantages. On his last day teaching at West Point, before he retired for good, a young cadet asked him a question. Colonel, if the Zorthak came back, if they tried to invade again, do you think we could defeat them? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I don't think they'll come back, he finally said. They learned what we taught them. That Earth is too dangerous not because of our weapons but because of what we are. We're a species that learns from every failure, that adapts to every threat, that refuses to accept the rules of the universe as they were given to us. He paused, looking at the young faces in front of him. But if they did come back, he continued, yes, I think we'd defeat them. Not faster. Not more easily. But eventually. Because we have something the Zorthak didn't have even after learning from us. We have hope. We have the belief that things can change, that tomorrow can be different, that impossibility is just the name for something that hasn't been accomplished yet. After class, Marcus walked through the academy grounds. He thought about Jackson, who'd become the lead engineer for Earth's rebuilding efforts. About Red, who'd established a foundation helping soldiers with psychological trauma. About Sarah, who'd won the Galactic Prize for Environmental Science for her work on sustainable reconstruction after the invasion. About Chin, who died 5 years ago saving a civilian during an accidental structural collapse at one of the rebuilding sites. About all of it, the cost, the victory, the strange way that survival and tragedy were always connected. The sun was setting over the Hudson River. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day that made Marcus remember why humans fought so hard to keep their world intact. An old woman approached him, Amanda, moving slowly with a cane, but with the same sharp intelligence she'd always possessed. I was wondering when you'd finally retire, she said, sitting next to him on the bench overlooking the river. Can't retire, Marcus replied. Too much history that needs to be remembered. Too many lessons that need to be taught. Do you regret it? Amanda asked. Offering them asylum? Letting them leave? Marcus was quiet for a long time. Every day, he finally said. But that's not the right question. What's the right question? Amanda asked. Did we become what we needed to become in order to survive? Marcus replied. Did we transform from a species that depended on technology and civilization into something tougher, something more adaptable, something more fundamentally human? And the answer is yes. The invasion broke us and rebuilt us. It stripped away the comfortable assumptions we had about ourselves and our world. And it showed us what we're actually capable of. He looked at Amanda. That's worth regretting every day, he said. Because it means we're still human. Because it means we still understand the cost of victory. Because it means we won't make the mistake the Zorthak made, believing that strength is the same as power. Amanda smiled. You know what the galactic community calls us now? She asked. Not the humans who defeated the Zorthak. The species that rewrote the rules of warfare. The civilization that proved intelligence was more valuable than technology. The apex predators that learned to lead with wisdom instead of teeth. Marcus looked back at the sunset. I wonder what the Zorthak tell their stories about us, he said quietly. The truth, Amanda replied. That they encountered a species willing to burn their own civilization to avoid losing their freedom. Willing to break themselves to avoid breaking. Willing to survive at any cost, and then wise enough to know what the cost actually was. She stood, preparing to leave. You taught them that, Marcus. You proved that the apex predator on any world is the one that refuses to stop being what it is, no matter what the universe throws at it. That's humanity. That's what you are. After Amanda left, Marcus sat alone as the sun dipped below the horizon. He thought about the soldiers who died. About the cities that had burned. About the Zorthak, ancient apex predators from a distant star system, learning what it meant to be broken by creatures they'd considered primitive. He thought about Scarthak, walking toward a ship with the weight of knowledge that would change his entire civilization. And he understood, finally, what they'd actually accomplished. It wasn't just victory. It was transformation. The invasion had come to a world and encountered not a superior species, but a different kind of species. One that survived not through evolution, but through learning. Not through dominance, but through adaptation. Not through giving up when things became impossible, but through becoming the kind of creature for whom impossible was just the starting point. The Zorthak had been the apex predators of their world. But Earth had something they didn't have, the capacity to become whatever the situation required. And in the end, that was stronger than any teeth, any armor, any technology. That was humanity. The end.